I'm betting many think back to the day the world changed. Millions of people suddenly disappearing, followed by the planet being bombarded with meteorites. Then a third world war, which ushered in a one-world government that now rules with an iron fist and has introduced mandatory implants for citizens to be deemed legal. For half of the few that refused, it meant face being discarded from a life many would deem as comfortable and relying on a land that without the government's technology was now hostile towards mankind. For the other half, the outcome was death. I, however, wonder about the day before and how most were completely oblivious to what was around the corner, distracted by careers, families, friends, and what they deemed as the finer things in life. Now human existence is filled with societies that are insanely selfish and void of love, on a planet that has been rewired to torment and devour human beings. It was as if every post-apocalyptic story ever told was put into a blender and thrown into reality. The answer to the question, what now, is somewhat easy and at the same time, somewhat impossible. In the middle of a desert road sits two individuals in what looks to be a pair of simple wooden deck chairs. One a slim-looking black man with short hair, of average height, wearing a jacket, a pair of trousers and footwear, which has a similar tone of brown as the sand around them. Under the jacket, the man wears a white t-shirt that, along with his sandals, give his look a smart, casual and practical vibe. The man possesses facial features, over which are a pair of spectacles, advertising his firm grip on youth. The other individual is an Asian-looking female, who is about an inch taller than her male counterpart. She has on a similar outfit, only her jacket is sleeveless, which along with the rest of her outfit displays a feminine physique that displays strength while instilling desire in the heart of most red-blooded males. She has long black hair, which is styled into a single ponytail, along with huge cold eyes, which punctuates her beauty. Okay, Eyes, they are going to be here any minute now. Because of who they are, there's going to be a temptation to be a bit excessive. But so as not to be led by emotions, let's remember that our goal is diplomacy, possibly provoking a change in heart. And if push comes to shove, discourage while not losing our sense of restraint, says the young man. His companion responds with silence and an empty look. What do you mean you'll try? When you say try, I get the impression that what you really mean is that you won't, says the young man, as though her look communicated with the same detail and expression as words out of her mouth. A gang of 6 men then begin to approach them, howling in cars, on motorcycles, and in outfits that look like they drove out of a Mad Max movie. The pair stands up while the chairs dissolve into sand as the gang choose to come to a halt right in front of them. Hello, gentlemen. My name is Barnabas, and this is my wife, Eyes, perkily says the young man. A large, muscular man, who seems to be the leader of the group, stands on the passenger side of a large motor vehicle, serving as the convoy's head. You and your wife will serve me, in different ways, of course, says the gang leader, using his deep voice to mock Barnabas. This causes his followers to laugh and Eyes to respond with a look of disgust. I know we live in very difficult times, but I have for you a solution that means you no longer need to ravage any village you can find. Instead, you can set up your own community where you can thrive in peace and prosperity, says Barnabas, without losing an ounce of politeness or enthusiasm. Ravaging brings me pleasure, says the leader, licking his lips while looking intensely at the young man's wife. Be that as it may, says Barnabas, but before he could complete his sentence, the leader brings out a huge pistol and shoots it at him, only for the bullet to be intercepted and stopped by some sand, which swirled up supernaturally. Everyone except for Barnabas and Eyes are stunned into silence. First of all, I just want to say violence is not our intention. However, if this many of you attack, I'm not sure I'll be able to monitor my wife's reactions, says Barnabas sincerely. The gang snaps out of the momentary trance and reverts back to their base nature by attacking the young couple mercilessly. Barnabas in turn responds with the use of incredibly graceful movements, along with what seems to be a supernatural manipulation of the sound around him, to humanely render all his attackers either unconscious or temporarily incapacitated and permanently discouraged. Eyes' response, although just as skillful but without any supernatural element to it, was a lot more unforgiving, as her responses ended with either broken bones or a quick exit from this life. In a matter of minutes, no member of the group was in any shape to verbally communicate. "You need deliverance," said Barnabas to Eyes as he sees the condition of all the men that chose to attack her. 6 hours later, the injured had made their retreat and the dead had begun to seemingly make their permanent residency in the middle of the road. An old, frail-looking Chinese man, dressed in a black suit inspired by his heritage, approaches the area. With one look, he reanimates the 15 dead into wild, ravenous beings that are half man and half mud. "Be free, my children," says the man, prompting the beings to take off like wild beasts. The next morning, Barnabas and Eyes walk into a plain and rural-looking village, set up in the middle of a desert. "This seems nice," says Barnabas to Eyes, as the villagers stare at them with an unwelcoming air of suspicion. The young couple are approached by a middle-aged man who is accompanied by 5 able-bodied men armed with automatic weapons. "Hello," enthusiastically greets Barnabas. "Who are you and what do you want?" asks the man, verbally slapping away Barnabas' attempt to establish a pleasant and cheerful interaction. "My name is Barnabas and this is my wife Eyes. We're just travelers passing through. In fact, we were wondering if there was any way we could help this lovely-looking community," responds Barnabas, seemingly unfazed by the lack of hospitality. "Keep to the passing through. This community doesn't need any help from unwanted strangers," says the man, as his men subtly advertise a willingness to use their weapons to support their leader's sentiments. "No problem, we don't want any trouble," says Barnabas, still displaying an enthusiastically cheerful disposition. The young couple begin to walk away. Then, Barnabas stops and turns around. "I don't mean to be a bother, but how is your community doing for water?" asks Barnabas. "There isn't enough to share with strangers," responds the man. "What? No. Me and my wife have all we need. I was wondering what you folks are doing for water, seeing as all the water outside the metropolitan areas are contaminated. Not to mention, we didn't really see any obvious sources of water near here." "Are you from the government?" asks the man. "No, then what or how we do things is none of your concern," says the man, cutting off Barnabas. Suddenly, out of nowhere, screams begin to spread around the area, and 15 mud mutants suddenly appear and plow through the village, tearing apart and taking a bite of anyone who wasn't fast enough to get away. "What the?" says the man as he pulls out a handgun and joins in with his men, who by now have begun to open fire on the beast alongside other armed villagers. But the bullets were having no effect on the beast and were only serving as inspirations for the beast to focus their attacks on. While Barnabas took time to read the makeup of the attacking creatures, Eyes jumped into action, grabbing a sharp metallic pole, birthed out of the surrounding destruction, and begins to do battle with the mutants, efficiently ending 3 of them in her first 8 movements. Now understanding the origins of the mutants, as well as establishing the fact they weren't human, Barnabas leaps into action, creating a field of dust around him, which he manipulates into a variety of weapons, depending on the number and proximity of his attackers. Sometimes the dust serves as a sword, sometimes it serves as a bowstaff, sometimes it serves as a whip, and other times it serves as projectile-like daggers, all of which he wielded with a consistent level of grace, agility, and accuracy. Before long, all 15 mud mutants were vanquished, while Barnabas and Eyes were surrounded by 50 villagers, some of whom were amazed by them, and others who just wanted to show their gratitude. In the midst of all the commotion, Barnabas notices a woman sitting on the ground crying uncontrollably. "It's okay, they can't hurt you anymore," says Barnabas after approaching and kneeling beside the woman. "My children, they're gone," screams the woman as other women from the village hug and lead her away, while Barnabas stares on helplessly. "One of those things must have taken them," said the man as he approaches Barnabas. "My name is Barry. Thank you for all you've done today," says the man as he offers his hand to Barnabas, who in turn shakes it while thinking about the well-being of the woman he had just seen being led away. That evening, the community sat, celebrated, mourned, and ate together in the village square, while Barry met with one of his subordinates in the dark, away from the fellowship. "Are they secure?" asks Barry. "Everything has been put in place for the last hour," answers his follower. Both men proceed to a warehouse on the outskirts of the village. They enter the building and turn on the lights, only to find Eyes standing a few feet in front of them. "What are you doing here?" asks Barry. "Don't bother. She refuses to speak like most people do, and prefers to speak one of two languages, one of which is understood only by me, and the other involves an experience that is usually unpleasant," says Barnabas, sitting on a chair designed to accommodate a prisoner, while Eyes cracks her knuckles. "What is the meaning of this?" asks Barry, now a little nervous. Now, you might have guessed I am a programmer, which for many simply means I'm some kind of wizard that commands the elements. The truth is a lot more scientific, but somewhat hard to explain. Like how a bird flies or a fish breathes underwater, says Barnabas as he casually walks up to both men, who are now incredibly uncomfortable. Anyway, being a programmer gives me the ability to view and read nature the way you would a book. This allows me to reprogram it and of course wield it in creative ways, says Barnabas, then causing the walls and the roof of the warehouse to quietly dissolve, while the ground they stood on transformed into a stage before the village that now sat before them like an audience in a theatre house. "Your fellow countrymen told my wife and I about how you had created a machine that could turn the blood of animals into pure drinking water, which is amazing. Here's the thing. My wife is the best hunter you will ever see, because apart from having impeccable tracking, archery and shooting skills, she can literally overpower any animal with her bare hands. So much so, she literally uses herself as bait sometimes. The thing is, since me and Eyes ventured into this area, we have been forced to adopt vegan diets because we haven't come across a single living creature safe to capture and eat. Which begs the question, where have you been getting blood to turn into water?" says Barnabas, at which point the woman that had been crying earlier made herself visible with her now safe children alongside a dozen other people. "We found this woman's children, along with those men and women, strapped to chairs designed to drain every drop of blood from their body. Which begs the question, how long have you been providing this community with water on the backs of innocent lives?" says Barnabas, now making direct eye contact with Barry. "About a year. That's when people started disappearing. All this time we thought it was because of bandits," says the mother. Barry and his subordinates tried to make a run for it, but Barnabas creates a cage around them out of the very ground they stood on, and then merges the cage to a prison to the left side of the stage that housed the remaining dozen men that worked with and for him. Brothers and sisters, we live in an age where the general care and love for others is on the verge of being extinct. Now is a time when an early and unnatural death is extremely likely. My wife and I will stay and make this town self-sufficient, but that will not guarantee your safety. We haven't been here for a full day, yet you have been attacked by monsters, and you have discovered that your own kin has been sacrificing your own for clean drinking water. This is why you have to get right with God right now and give your life to Jesus Christ. Only then can you create yourself a win-win situation. Survive and see the second coming of Christ, or die and go and be with the Lord, says Barnabas, addressing the entire village. That night, the entire community got right with God and dedicated their lives to Jesus Christ. The next day, Barnabas uses his programming skills to provide the village with a source of clean drinking water and a large plot of fertile land filled with a variety of vegetables. He also endowed the mother he reunited with her children with basic programming skills to purify contaminated water. Please ensure the resources are used wisely, advises Barnabas. I will, says the mother as she kisses Barnabas on the cheek. The villagers then wave goodbye as the young couple continue their journey. One point for me, life as a young Indian man was a corporate career, time for leisure, dating, friends, and family. Then all of a sudden, I was in the middle of a world war, which at one point was unthinkable as far as I was concerned. But thinking back, there were more than enough signs and even warnings. The war went from something I saw on the news to something that was right on my doorstep. Many believe invading forces were behind the initial disappearance of millions around the world. But when you're constantly trying to survive, the reason why is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is the fact that it is happening. Somehow, I survived the war and witnessed the formation of the one world government. To ensure the world was never subjected to another world war again, a law was passed to offer every citizen of this planet an implant that will guarantee them food, clothing, shelter, and most of all, protection. At first, it was a program you could take part voluntarily, but then after 6 months, it became mandatory. Many people refused the implant because they thought it was a way of the government to take their privacy. Some thought the implant was some kind of mind control mechanism, and others thought it was the mark of the beast talked about in the book of Revelations. I personally thought the fact that it was mandatory had to mean something sinister was behind it. Out of the blue, I, along with other people without implants, was forcefully taken to a top secret prison camp, where we were sterilized and forced to wear blue overalls. Apart from the fact we were taken there by force and weren't allowed to leave, we were treated well. We were fed 3 times a day with a decent menu, we were allowed to socialize with each other, and there was even state-of-the-art leisure activities. But the lack of freedom for many brought a sense of fear and anxiety. My source of fear and anxiety was the fact that every day a prisoner would be calmly questioned by the warden and be given a choice to accept the implant or be executed. From the tiny window of my cell and through an impenetrable transparent wall in the common room area, I would see prisoners who accepted the implant leave the camp without incident, and the prisoners who refused be shot and disposed of efficiently. The day finally came when I was being escorted to the warden's office, but before I could get there, the camp was attacked by an armed anti-government group. I suddenly found myself running around aimlessly in the midst of chaos. "Follow me, I know a way out," said a young blonde-haired woman dressed in a black business suit. She led me, along with 20 others, out of the facility and down a path through a neighboring forest area. "Keep going straight until you come to an abandoned house near a lake," said the woman as she began to make her way back. "Where are you going?" I asked. "I'm a member of the resistance, posing as a government worker. If I don't go back, I will lose my cover," said the woman. "Can I at least know your name?" I asked. "Susan," she responded. "Harold," I said. An awkward silence followed, and then she made her way back to the facility. I and 20 others followed Susan's instructions and found the abandoned house, which turned out to be a 15-room mansion that, apart from being filthy, was in pretty good shape. There was even a supply of food, water, and cleaning materials. Somehow I became the lead of the group, and we got to work cleaning. A member of the group got the power on, which meant access to TV, computers with stealth access to the internet, and many other modern appliances. As a group, we became close and began to solve all sorts of problems together, such as security, reconnaissance, and managing resources. A month later, Susan pulled up in a rundown car filled with supplies. "If you had not come with all we needed, we definitely would have had to move on," I said as Susan and I walked together by the lake. "I have an implant, which means I can get everything you guys need without being detected," said Susan as she threw a pebble into the lake. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Because it's the right thing to do," answered Susan. We both then looked into each other's eyes, and then Susan kissed me. "I'm sorry if I overstepped," said Susan as I stood there stunned. "No, it's okay," I said, then proceeding to kiss her and begin our love affair. A year has passed and the group is thriving, but it has been a month since I've seen Suzanne, which is weird, seeing as she normally checks in every week. Against the advice of others, at night I decided to see what was happening at the prison camp we had escaped from. "What are you doing here?" whispered Susan as she found me lying low behind some bushes. "I came to see if you're okay," I whispered back. I'm sorry I haven't been in contact, but the resistance is planning to hit the government site hard tonight, which could mean eradicating all government presence in this area. That's great. What can I do? I asked. Go back to the group. I'll meet you sometime tomorrow, said Susan, then kissing me before heading off. Be careful, I said, causing Susan to stop, turn and say, I will. I got back to the house in the early hours of the morning, only to find the group bubbling with excitement around 2 travelers that were now staying as guests. They had apparently created a clean source of water as well as a garden filled with fresh vegetables. Hi, my name is Barnabas, and that there is my wife Eyes, said the young stranger, while the woman he referred to as his wife beat all the men in the group one by one at arm wrestling, with a blank look and the physique of some kind of strength-based athlete. Harold, I replied, shaking his hand. The group told me you were getting support from a lady that is chipped, said Barnabas. That's right, she'll probably be stopping by later on. Look, I'm really tired, so is it okay if we speak later? Sure, no problem, responded Barnabas. I woke up in the afternoon only to overhear Barnabas speaking with the group. These harsh times are a reminder that eternity is always around the corner. But the truth is, it has always been like this, since the fall of man. Safety, especially now, can be nothing more than an illusion if you don't put your trust in Jesus Christ, said Barnabas to a captivated audience. Hearing enough, I decided to get some fresh air. Outside, I witnessed Susan pull up in front of the house and then getting out of the car with 2 men dressed in military-type uniforms. How did it go? I asked, happy to see my love again. Exactly as planned, replied Susan, giving me a hug and a kiss. Get away from them, said Barnabas from behind, with his wife standing by his side. What? I responded, now very confused. Harold, who is this? Asked Susan. Harold, listen to me carefully. Those people in front of you are not human, said Barnabas with a voice that was both serious and sincere. I turned to look at Susan, who by now had a very sinister smile on her face. She and the men that accompanied her then transformed into 8 feet tall creatures that were half man and half panther, with long, leathery, spear-pointed like tails. One of the beasts attempted to take a swipe at me, but was intercepted by a hill of mud that suddenly emerged from the ground. With a wave of his hand, Barnabas then created a 20-foot high wall in front of the house in an effort to protect the group inside. That weakened me. I need you to buy me some time, said Barnabas to his wife, who in turn leapt into action and began to battle the 3 creatures, displaying strength, agility, and speed that was beyond human. Despite her abilities, the creatures proved to be too much and began to get the better of her. Barnabas, still seeming a bit weak, jumps into the fray and begins to redirect the attacks of the creatures with the use of an insane skill set, causing the creatures to lose balance and at times even thrown to the floor. This allowed his wife to connect several bone-shattering strikes on each monster, ending their lives in a very dramatic and painful fashion. Barnabas, with a wave of his hand, dissolved the wall and began to approach me, who was still on the floor in shock. I know it's a lot to take in, but there were demons that create and manage human forms like this all over the world, said Barnabas as he helped me up. Farms? I responded, still shocked and confused. They set up seemingly safe and luxurious communities like this, where people are well fed and even reproduce. Then, when they feel the farm has run its course, they have a big feed. They then start the process all over again, explained Barnabas, which caused me to drop to my knees in disbelief. Your first clue should have been the fact that she was helping you while claiming to be chipped. Anyone fitted with a government implant loses the ability to go against the government in any way and show that kind of compassion towards people without implants, informed Barnabas. That night, Barnabas gave another sermon to the group, and this time I really listened. We all gave our lives to Jesus Christ that night. Barnabas said staying at the farm was no longer safe, so the next morning, we all joined him and his wife on their travels. Barnabas set up camp with his fellow travelers in a mountain area, before venturing with his wife into a town 10 miles away. Impressive, said Barnabas as he walked into a modern town with a population of about 300, which seemed very clean and peaceful. Wait! Stop! You don't understand! Screamed a man, who along with his family seemed to be dragged out of his home by 2 men dressed in black modern ninja-type uniforms. Eyes took a step in an effort to intervene, but is gently stopped by Barnabas. He then assertively and gracefully got the two men off the family without causing them any pain or damage. "What seems to be the problem here?" asked Barnabas politely. The men, saying nothing, began to attack Barnabas with high-level martial arts skills. Barnabas, with very little effort, fended off the attacks in a way that ended with both of them receiving strikes, which discouraged them from attacking any further, causing them to retreat. "Thank you," said the man as he tended to his ill-looking wife. "Why were those men attacking you?" asked Barnabas. "People like me choose to live here because it is a place of sanctuary from the surrounding wasteland. In exchange for food, water, and shelter, we are required to work. But for the last few days, I have been unable to because my wife is sick and my two children are still very young," explained the man. "Doesn't this town have a hospital?" asked Barnabas. "No, we have to tend to our sicknesses and injuries by ourselves," said the man as he and Barnabas got his wife into a bed inside. Barnabas then proceeded to use his programming powers to gather a diagnosis of the man's wife's condition. "It appears she has been poisoned," informed Barnabas. He then proceeded to use his skills to extract all the poison from her body. "She should be fine after a day's rest," said Barnabas, much to the man's delights. "Do people in this town get ill often?" asked Barnabas. "There are about a dozen cases of illnesses every week, and the sick usually disappear. People don't seem to care as new people join the town every day to replace the lost workers," shared the man. "Where can I find the people that govern the town?" asked Barnabas. "The 6 governors reside in a building on the other side of town." "Stay here with them," said Barnabas to Eyes. Barnabas then walked to the other side of town and came to the governor's building, which was a heavily guarded cube-shaped building made mostly out of glass and steel. Barnabas knew he was in the right place as the guards' outfits were identical to the ones on the men he fought earlier. Barnabas was able to walk into the building unchallenged, which indicated to the fact his arrival was expected. As the young programmer entered the building, he walked into a courtroom-like setting with 6 aristocratic-looking individuals seated on the stage the way a judge would during a trial. "I take it you're the 6 governors?" said Barnabas. "And you are the stranger causing trouble," said one of the 3 female governors. "If you mean me stopping your men by dragging a sick woman onto the street, then yes, that is me," responded Barnabas. "If you want to live in this town, you have to abide by the rules," said one of the male governors. "Not allowing a man to tend to his sick wife when you provide no medical service is a bit harsh, don't you think?" responded Barnabas. "We provide the system that purifies the town's water regardless of how we are feeling, so we expect the same work ethic from our fellow townfolk," said a female governor. "From what I can gather, the only people in this town who get pure drinking water are the people who live in this building. However, the water outside this building, although not as contaminated as the water outside your community, is contaminated nonetheless. This means it is slowly killing your townfolk, the same townfolk that work on your farms and rear your animals," pointed out Barnabas. The governors react by quietly talking amongst themselves. "Look, I'm not here to arrest you or anything like that. In fact, I'm willing to provide the whole town with a source of clean water, which will give you the chance to manage things fairly," offered Barnabas. "Your presence here will disrupt the order we have worked so hard to establish. Leave the town or we will have you arrested," said one of the female governors. Barnabas is then escorted by 2 guards towards the exit of the town. As the 3 men got to the town center, Barnabas knocked both guards out with ease. He then created a personal stage for himself, which got the attention of many of the townspeople. "Brothers and sisters, I know the surrounding wasteland is unforgiving, but staying in this town guarantees a slow, premature death, as the water you are drinking is still slightly contaminated. Come with me right now, and I will set you up in your own community with clean drinking water and no oppression," said Barnabas in a loud and clear voice. This instantly caused about 100 people to follow him. By the time he reunited with his wife, the number rose to 250. "Take them to the camp while I make sure you're not being followed," instructed Barnabas to Eyes. An hour later, 50 of the governor's guards ran through a now deserted town, only to find Barnabas sitting casually by a fountain. "There doesn't have to be any violence. In fact, I can help you the way I intend to help the people that once lived here," said Barnabas sincerely. The guards respond by attacking Barnabas, who easily defends himself, utilizing both his combat and programming skills, using the elements of earth and water. 10 miles later, Barnabas returned back to his camp that was now overcrowded. He then pushed his programming skills to the limit and beyond by turning the campsite into a full-fledged town, with enough small houses, source of clean water, and fertile land filled with vegetables for everyone at the camp. After Barnabas was done, he collapsed into the arms of his wife. The next morning, Barnabas awoke in a bed with Eyes seated on a chair beside him. "Good morning," said Barnabas, unsure of what time in the day it was. A few hours later, Harold, who was now endowed with water-based programming skills, and some other people saw Barnabas and Eyes off as they proceeded to leave the newly formed town to continue their travels. "Make sure this place is a blessing," said Barnabas to Harold. "No problem," responded Harold. "I made you something," said Barnabas to Eyes. He then handed her a sword made out of diamond fused with titanium steel in a leather case which can be strapped onto her back. "I thought since every now and again we're facing monsters, you might need this. Just promise me you won't use it on people," said Barnabas. Eyes responded with a blank look and then proceeded to kiss her husband on the cheek. I considered taking the implant, but had a change of heart once I realized the people who didn't accept it were forcefully taken to prison camps. So I gathered as much supplies as possible and drove off into the wastelands. I figured being a scientist who grew up on a farm meant I would be fine. I soon realized anywhere outside the metropolitan areas were referred to as wastelands for a reason. The water wasn't safe to drink, plus it was littered with wild animals and other things that were worse. I was constantly on edge, having to fend off all kinds of beasts, some of which I had never seen before. After 3 months, I was on the verge of running out of food, water, and ammunition. Living in my car, which was out of fuel, no longer seemed like a viable option. So I was forced to walk, which I did for 4 days before coming to an abandoned bungalow in a countryside area. I slept there for 2 days and found it to be a quiet and peaceful area. So I cleaned up the place and found enough material to create a water purifying system based on a device that could turn urine into clean drinking water. I then created a small garden at the back of the building, and before long, I had hope for survival. "Hey," said a voice from behind, which made me jump and point the miniature shovel in my hand at a stranger, showing a willingness to use it like a weapon. "I mean you no harm. I'm just lost," said the man, who, like me, was a thin Caucasian man in his 30s. He looked like he had been wandering the lands for a while without any means to clean or feed himself. I knew it was risky, but I let him stay and share the little I had. This was partly due to the fact I felt sorry for him, but also partly due to the fact I was lonely. "My name's Chris," revealed the man, as he offered his hand, while joining me by the fire. It was now evening, and I had given him time to clean up and have some salad that I prepared earlier. "Winston," I replied, shaking his hand. "There was a time I would eat about anything but a salad," joked Chris. "How did you end up in the wastelands?" I asked. "I'm a Christian that got left behind," replied Chris. "I see," I said. "You?" asked Chris. "I'm not a Christian, I just didn't feel right about the implant system," I explained. "I see," said Chris. The next morning, I awoke to find Chris cutting down a tree with an axe. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Once upon a time, I worked in construction. I thought I'd put my skills to good use and not waste the day," answered Chris while he continued working. For a while, I would farm and maintain the water purification system that was now in full effect, and Chris would build sheds, huts, fences, and walls. Before long, other wanderers joined us and helped add value to the area, and within 2 years we had created the little village known as Hope, with a population of about 50 people. Chris helped put in place a parliamentary system which was used to govern the village and resolve any issues, which at the time wasn't really needed, but was done in anticipation of further growth. Then one day, a young man named Matthew wandered into the village, like we all had done in the past. He was strong, enthusiastic, and seemed a perfect fit to help Chris's team of builders upgrade as well as maintain the village. Unknown to us, Matthew was a scout for a ruthless crew of bandits made up of about 20 men. After a week of blending with our community, Matthew opened the gates of our village to the bandits, who came in without notice to create carnage. Chris and about 30 other men fought off the bandits, but not without casualties. The next morning, Matthew and 7 surviving bandits were chained to a wall until a prison was built for them, while we buried 20 of our brothers and sisters. A year later, and the village has continued to grow and thrive. We now have a population of 120 people. Good afternoon, everyone. I've called this meeting because Hope's water purification system is in need of repairs, which means for the next 3 months, we as a community will have to ration food and water, I said, now at a parliamentary session that was in full swing. We can put in place a system where for the next 3 months, we all eat once a day and bath once a week, suggested Chris. That may be good for the short term, but for the long term, I propose we put in place a system that ensures every member of the community has to work for food and water, and enemies of the village should be left to starve in prison, I said. This caused the 20 members of parliament to whisper amongst themselves. We have new mothers, children, and the elderly to consider, and leaving people to starve to death is inhumane, responded Chris. We live in an inhumane world where bandits can attack without notice, and we need all hands on deck to ensure we survive as a community. Not doing so is a luxury we simply can't afford, I pointed out. My words fell on deaf ears, and Chris's proposal was put ahead of mine. I returned to my room very frustrated, only to find an old Chinese man dressed in a black government-issued suit seated casually in my chair. Who are you and how did you get into my room? I asked. My name is Zhu Man, but you can call me Zhu, said the old man. Okay, Zhu, what are you doing in my room? I'm here to give you something that will make them listen to you, said Zhu. Which is? I asked. Power, responded Zhu, then firing a bolt of purple energy from his eyes, which hit and threw me across the room. Every aspect of my body inside and out felt like it was on fire for a good 15 minutes. After the pain passed, I stood up feeling very different and very powerful. An hour later, I recalled Parliament for an emergency meeting. I have called you here to ask that you reconsider my earlier proposal, I said. Winston, is this why you called us here? We've already decided as a group how we're going to move forward as a community. Our decision isn't going to change in an hour, said Chris. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, then firing an energy blast at Winston, which disintegrated him in an instant. Is there anyone else who believes Parliament can't change its mind within an hour? I asked, seeing the fear in the eyes of everyone who sat in the room. It is then I realized being a god was far more effective than being a leader. Elsewhere, Barnabas and Eyes took in the mountain area as they continued their travels. I have a joke for you. A boy breaks an old vase at a rich uncle's house. The uncle gets extremely angry and yells, "Do you even know how old the vase was? It was from the 17th century. The boy sagged in relief. Oh, good that it wasn't new, said Barnabas. Eyes responded with a blank look. Making you laugh is hard, but I love a challenge, said Barnabas, ready to unleash another joke. After enduring 2 days of traveling, which heavily featured a lot of Barnabas's jokes, one afternoon the young couple came upon a small community filled with singing and dancing. Hello, strangers. My name is Sydney and you are welcome to join us, said a very short, pudgy-looking man as he took the young couple by the hand and guided them to seats in form of hay. And before they knew it, they were in the presence of a variety of entertaining acts, from dancers to clowns to acrobats, flamethrowers, and singers. Barnabas was very animated, clapping, laughing, and even shedding a tear or two, while Eyes took in everything with her usual emotionless disposition. This is the most hospitable community we have visited in a long time, said Barnabas, gladly accepting some pastry that was offered to him. We were a traveling carnival for many generations before the world changed. Even if we are confined to this here community, we still do our very best to keep our heritage alive, explained Sydney. How have you managed to access clean drinking water? Asked Barnabas. Come, let me show you. said Sydney, getting up and leading Barnabas, while Eyes continued to watch the festivities. Sydney took Barnabas to an area behind the hut, where an old gypsy-looking woman was producing all kinds of potions. "Hello, Ariel. Barnabas and his wife are visiting us for a short while, and I wanted to show him how we purify our water," said Sydney. The old woman, with a simple hand gesture, ushered them over to a huge body of muddy water in a swimming pool-like hole in the ground. She then brought out a small bottle filled with blue liquid, of which she put a drop of in the pool of muddy water. In an instant, the water went from muddy to 100% clean. "This is amazing," gasped Barnabas. "For a programmer, you're easily impressed," said Ariel. "How?" "Don't look so surprised. It's not that hard to figure out. You're traveling across the wastelands, yet you're clean and healthy," pointed out Ariel. "I guess so," responded Barnabas, seeing the old woman's point. Sydney and the young programmer paid their respects and began to head back towards the festivities. "Please forgive me if I'm out of line by asking this, but is everything okay between you and your wife?" asked Sydney. "Why do you ask?" responded Barnabas, a little confused. "It's just, your wife looks kind of sad," said Sydney. Both men then take a look at Eyes, who sat with her usual blank look, while a few of the community's young women fussed over her. "Trust me when I say that's one of her happy faces," pointed out Barnabas. "I see," said Sydney, then proceeding to stop Barnabas from approaching his wife. "Let us set up a nice romantic evening for you both before you resume your travels," requested Sydney. "No problem," obliged Barnabas. The young woman fussing around Eyes then proceeded to lead her into a tent, where they gave her a nice soothing bubble bath, a pedicure and manicure, as well as starting to do her hair and makeup. That evening, Barnabas stepped into a very romantically themed courtyard, surrounded by music designed to add to the mood. Dressed in a smart black suit. Moments later, Eyes emerged in a lovely black dress that suited her perfectly. "Wow," said Barnabas, taken by the beauty of his wife, who in turn stood there with her usual look. Barnabas took her by the hand and proceeded to slowly dance with her in line with the surrounding music. "I know I don't say this enough, but you are the most beautiful woman I have ever laid eyes on," said Barnabas as he and Eyes gracefully moved to the music as one. Eyes responded by resting her forehead against his with her eyes closed while they continued to dance. Probably the most magical moments the young couple had shared with one another was abruptly brought to an end as 30 bandits smashed through the community with automobiles and motorcycles, firing guns while screaming and shouting. Eyes and Barnabas were ready to take action, but before they could even move a muscle, every member of the community turned into huge demonic beings and proceeded to tear apart every single bandit that chose to attack the community. After about 15 minutes, no bandit was left alive, and the villagers reverted back to their human forms. There was blood and body parts everywhere. "What have you done to yourselves?" asked Barnabas as he stood in shock. "We used to be a lot bigger as a community, but as you can imagine, our numbers began to dwindle as night after night we were attacked by either bandits or monsters. So Ariel created a potion out of demon blood that allowed us to access power to defend ourselves as a community," explained Sydney. "What you have done to yourselves is ungodly," said Barnabas. "What will you have us do? Let this world kill us off one by one without even trying to defend ourselves?" responded Sydney. "Sydney, this world is nothing more than a temporary home for us. Surviving is pointless if we do so at the expense of our eternal destination," explained Barnabas. "You're telling me if you could, you wouldn't kill to bring back your people?" challenged Sydney. "I can help you. Just let me reverse what you've done to yourself. Then you can travel with us and receive all the protection you need," promised Barnabas, on the verge of begging. "The fact that you're the last of your kind says to me your so-called protection isn't exactly guaranteed survival," responded Sydney. Barnabas, with a great amount of sadness, along with his wife, grabbed his things and proceeded to leave the community. Ruby, a young freckle-faced Caucasian woman, let out a big sigh as she takes a seat in the staff room of the primary school she works in. "Is it that bad?" asked Diane, a middle-aged colleague. I love teaching, but it has become more paperwork than actual teaching, replied Ruby. Are you thinking of a career change? Responded Diane. Maybe. I don't know. You see, I love working with children. It's just I want to do more with them than a teaching job is allowing, said Ruby. Youth work? Not focused enough for me. Social work? I feel like I'll have the same dilemma. There's this project I heard about that gives people opportunity to run orphanages in rural areas, informed Diane. Really? Responded Ruby, now very interested. 6 months after looking into the scheme, Ruby found herself running an orphanage in a beautiful countryside setting. It was everything she dreamed of and more. One day, Sam, a 7-year-old who lived at the orphanage, wandered off while playing outside and found Zoo sitting quietly on a bench. Hello, greeted Sam. Didn't your parents teach you not to talk to strangers? Responded Zoo. Sam, unsure how to answer, looked back towards the orphanage and then turned to talk to Zoo, only to find that he and the bench was nowhere to be seen. All that was left was a black, untitled book on the floor. Sam picked up the book and headed back towards the orphanage. Sam, what do you have there? Asked Ruby as Sam walked in with the book in his hand. I found it outside, said Sam, handing over the book to Ruby and then running off. Ruby looked at the book, which she immediately found very creepy. So much so, she locked it away in a store cupboard. After the world changed, Ruby, her staff, and the few children that didn't go missing managed to survive a whole year, due to the fact that the water in their area stayed pure for a longer time than everywhere else because of a geographic anomaly. Then the orphanage was attacked by bandits and they were all dragged to their savage camp, where her children were either enslaved or cooked. After they were tired of abusing her, the bandits changed Ruby to a tree beside the garbage heap like a dog. Among the trash that mainly consisted of items taken from the orphanage was the book she took from Sam. Ruby began reading the book, which in turn opened up her spirit to dark forces, which she let consume her for the sake of vengeance. Now completely taken over by demonic forces, Ruby began killing every living thing in the camp indiscriminately, including surviving children that were once in her care. By the time Barnabas and Eyes approached Ruby's orphanage, it was a nest covered in demonic fungus. Barnabas rolled a pebble towards the nest to see if anything was inside. Looks like it's empty, said Barnabas. Then, without notice, a 30-foot dragon leaped out of the nest, causing the young couple to disperse in opposite directions in an effort to get out of its way. Using his programming skills, Barnabas began to create and throw large boulders at the dragon, which began to knock it all over the place. Barnabas then created a huge concrete fist and shot it towards the beast while standing on top of it like a surfboard. The young programmer then executed a backward somersault as the fist collided with the dragon, causing it to stagger. On his way to the ground, displaying incredible agility, Barnabas began kicking the debris caused by the collision towards the dragon, which struck the beast like they were bullets out of a machine gun. As Barnabas' feet touched the ground, Eve leapt over him with the intent to strike with her sword the creature which was now on its back. The dragon in turn released a wave of fire from its mouth at the female warrior, who was instantly shielded by a sphere of wind created by her husband. This stopped Eyes from being burnt alive, but not from being slapped into a nearby tree with the dragon's tail. The beast got back to its feet and shot another wave of fire at Barnabas, who utilized his programming skills to redirect the flames back at the beast with zero effect. After the fire and smoke cleared, for a split second the dragon and Barnabas looked into each other's eyes. "This isn't right," said Barnabas to himself. The dragon then began to run towards Barnabas, who stood completely still. Then, as the dragon was about to make contact, at the last minute, the programmer enabled the concrete pillar to shoot out of the ground, which in turn served as an uppercut that sent the dragon to the floor, hard. Eyes once again leaped into the air in an attempt to deliver a life-ending blow with her sword, but once again was slapped aside by the creature's tail. Barnabas manipulated the earth beneath the dragon to restrain it for a brief moment, while using the same programming technique he uses to extract poison from a person's body, but on a larger scale. So much so he yelled while utilizing the technique. A huge purple explosion followed. When the dust settled, Ruby was on the floor naked, muttering, "I couldn't save them. I couldn't save them." Barnabas, after catching his breath, took off his jacket and covered the traumatized woman with it. At first, when Winston became the supreme leader of hope, things didn't really seem that bad. For starters, the village had gained ultimate protection against bandits and monsters, for Winston operated like a superhero for the community. This is why at first, Winston hovering over the village throughout the day was welcomed by most in the community. Then people started getting arrested for crimes, with the people welcoming law and order, until prisoners were allowed to starve and be without basic amenities for months on end for crimes that were considered minor, such as stealing a loaf of bread or fighting with a friend over a little misunderstanding. Then not working was considered a crime, whether you were sick or not. This of course caused people to express concerns amongst themselves, which led to speaking out against Winston's being a crime. This of course caused many to want to leave the community, as they began to feel unsafe. But the people of Hope were no longer allowed to leave the village, in effect turning the community into a prison. Winston then introduced the law of mandatory tributes to him every afternoon, which brought a prison sentence if not carried out. Soon after, Winston threw out prison sentences altogether and replaced them with on-the-spot executions by his hand. Now, when Winston hovers over the village, there is a shadow of fear. That night, Craig took his wife with their 4-year-old son and began to head towards the exit of the village. "What are you guys doing?" whispered Jonathan, a close friend of his, from the shadow of a large oak tree nearby. "We can't stay here," whispered back Craig. "The wastelands aren't safe. Don't you remember what we went through out there?" highlighted Jonathan. "Yesterday, Joe was killed in front of me because Winston thought he was someone else. Then he shrugged it off the way you would if you found a stain on your shirt," replied Craig. "Accidents happen," said Jonathan. "Don't you get it? No one is safe here," responded Craig. He and his family resumed their plan to leave the village, with Jonathan following behind, only to have Winston land in front of them. "Planning to leave? Is this how you show thanks to your God?" said Winston, as Craig, his family, and Jonathan froze in total fear. "God? Come on, man, be serious," said a voice from behind. Winston turned to see Barnabas, Eyes, and Ruby standing at the entrance of the village, which they had opened. "What, you think you can defy me and live?" said Winston, engulfing his eyes and hands in purple flames. "Yes, madman, we mere mortals feel we can defy you and your God complex," said Barnabas. The young programmer then turned to his wife and said, "To prove my point, I'm not going to use any programming skills, which means I need you to parry while I strike." Eyes responded to his words with a little smirk. "What, you don't think I can exercise self-control without using any programming skills?" replied Barnabas. Winston, feeling mocked, shoots out a blast of energy at the young couple, who in turn avoided it by jumping in opposite directions. The blast revealed the fact that Barnabas had subtly encased them with Winston in a large dome made out of wind and moisture. Eyes, noticing what her husband had done, reacted by giving him a side eye. "What? Preventing collateral damage doesn't count," defended Barnabas. Winston takes to the sky and begins to rain down energy blasts at the young warriors. Barnabas in turn begins to advance forward, using both orthodox and unorthodox movements that displayed monkey-like agility. Any energy blast that he was able to avoid, Eyes blocked or deflected with her sword, while retaliating with attempted fatal strikes every time the opportunity presented itself, as a result of her mind-blowing agility. At one point, out of sheer frustration, Winston unleashed an energy wave that caused Barnabas to lose balance, which Eyes immediately remedied with a nudge that allowed him to resume his forward motion and land a well-placed aerial slap to the eyes of Winston, causing him to fall to the ground with temporary blindness. This allowed Barnabas to strike 12 of the self-proclaimed God's pressure points at lightning speed, and then spin into a stance right in front of Winston, who attempted to shoot an energy blast at Barnabas, who with a smile on his face didn't move an inch. What have you done to me?" screamed Winston. "I took away all your abilities, which I'm pretty sure you can't do to a god," mocked Barnabas. In a fit of rage, Winston throws a punch at Barnabas, who effortlessly catches it with his hand, and a facial expression that said, "Really?" Winston was thrown in prison, and the young couple spent a week in the community of Hope, where they shared the gospel, provided a clean water supply, and upgraded the community's farmlands. For a while, it was like I was trapped in a cloud of darkness. Then there was a sudden explosion of light, And there they were, taking care of me. Barnabas saw the monster I had become but treated me like family. Even Eyes, who at first seemed hard and aloof, clearly showed she would protect me, a stranger, at the expense of her own life. This is why I decided to follow them instead of staying in the community of hope. We traveled for 3 days before coming to a camp where up to 40 very hard-up-looking people, men, women and children, were forced to watch no-holds-barred fighting in a large circular pit alongside 100 bandits. "It's okay, Ruby. We won't let anything happen to you," said Barnabas to me, seeing the fear that took hold of me when I saw the bandits who were like the ones who destroyed my orphanage. When we approached the pit, a young and strong-looking Caucasian man with a shaved head, dressed in rags, was fighting a bandit with knives attached to chains. The young man's fighting skills were impressive, as the bandit, who was extremely dangerous, was unable to touch his opponent, who in turn was able to hit him a lot until the bandit was on the floor unconscious. All the hard-up people cheered for joy. "He's done it! Again! We're going to eat today," said the hard-up woman who stood near us. "Well done, David. Your victory means the people here will not only live for another day, but will be able to eat today," said the large bandit, who seemed to be the organizer of the event. The young man responded with a look very similar to the one Eyes gives regularly. "How would you like a chance to secure these people food and freedom for a whole month?" asked the large bandit. "Who would I have to fight?" asked David. "Ah, there lies the catch. For this opportunity, you would have to accept the challenge without knowing who your opponent would be," stated the bandit, who was clearly enjoying himself. "I accept," said David. "Fantastic," yelled out the bandit, which caused his men to open the entrance to the arena, which allowed the man to walk in wearing a bionic exoskeleton suit that made him 9 feet tall with the artillery of a modern tank. David, totally unprepared to be this ridiculously outmatched, could only stare as his opponent began to rain down bullets at him, which were blocked by Eyes' sword as she jumped in front of him. "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa. Let's all take a deep breath and remain calm," cried out Barnabas as he jumped in the middle of the pit. "I'm very calm. She's the one that is interrupting the bout," said the large bandit while stopping his men from attacking with a hand gesture. "She means no disrespect. It's just this gentleman clearly is unable to defeat your fine-looking warrior," responded Barnabas. "Not my problem. He agreed to the terms," stated the bandits. "How about I fight your man instead?" said Barnabas, which in turn caused all the bandits in the area to laugh hysterically. "No problem," said the large bandit, after just about being able to compose himself. "If I win, then you will have to let all these people leave safely for good," added Barnabas. "Whatever you say," said the large bandit. The armored-up bandit, not even allowing Eyes and David to leave the arena, began to load up his gun ready to fire. Barnabas, with just a flicker of his finger, caused the armor to fall to pieces until all that remained was the bandit standing before him, totally unarmed and confused. Barnabas then smiled and proceeded to knock him out with a kick to the head. "How did you do that?" asked the large bandit, who by now was visibly unhappy with what had just transpired. "It doesn't matter how I did it. All that matters now is that you let all these people go as agreed," responded Barnabas. "Tell you what, I will let these people go if you're able to survive," said the large bandit, then allowing his men to attack. Barnabas, mainly focusing on preventing the loss of innocent lives, began to do battle with all the surrounding bandits, while Eyes, showing no mercy, began to execute every bandit that chose to attack her or an innocent bystander in her vicinity. David also used his fighting skills to do battle with bandits and was unable to incapacitate a few while being protected by Barnabas' programming skills. Before long, the few bandits that survived fled, and Barnabas found himself nodding his head as he viewed the many victims of Eyes. The young programmer proceeded to clean up the area and create a nice-looking community with a source of clean drinking water and food. A day later, after endowing David with basic programming skills, we were ready to continue our travels. "You are an incredible fighter," said David to Eyes while he bid us farewell. "Don't encourage her. responded Barnabas. Barnabas, Eyes, and Ruby had been traveling for a little under a day when they came to an old medieval castle in the middle of a large field. "Wow, this is beautiful," commented Barnabas. Barnabas," said Ruby, pointing at the fact that an infrared dot was on his chest as a result of a woman pointing a gun at him from high on top of the castle's wall. "Hello there," greeted Barnabas enthusiastically. "Keep it moving," shouted back the woman. "We were hoping maybe we could get some shelter for the night," stated Barnabas. The woman responded by firing a bullet that hit right beside where the trio stood. "The next shot will not miss," warned the woman. "Okay, no problem. Sorry to be a nuisance," said Barnabas as he and his traveling partners began to distance themselves from the castle. "You're adorable," said Ruby. "Why, thank you," responded Barnabas. "I'm serious. You could break into that castle and dismantle whatever defenses they have in there, but you choose to act like a scared little boy when they point a single gun at you," highlighted Ruby with admiration in her eyes. "The truth is, we all belong to be in this messed up world. And the biggest lie being embraced right now is do whatever you can to survive, even at the expense of your own humanity, which is pointless if your soul ends up being damned. This is why the Bible says, he who tries to save his life will lose it, and he who chooses to lose his life for the sake of the Lord actually ends up saving it. All I can do is try to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with word and deed, and sometimes that means backing off like a scared little boy. Now stop complimenting me before Eyes gets the wrong idea," responded Barnabas jokingly. Eyes in turn responded with a look that said, "As if." An hour later, Barnabas created a temporary camp where they stopped to have something to eat and get some rest. The trio were able to get almost 3 hours sleep before being woken up by 6 heavily armed women who were all pointing automatic weapons at them. "Can I help you?" said Barnabas as he subtly stopped Eyes from retaliating. "Stand up," ordered the woman who seemed to be the leader of the group. Barnabas, Eyes, and Ruby complied. "What is this about?" asked Barnabas. "A woman in our community was murdered," replied the leader. "And you think we're responsible?" asked Ruby. "That's right," responded the leader. "Are you from the castle we passed about 7 hours ago?" asked Barnabas. "So you admit to entering our community," said the woman. "So you think we entered your castle, killed this member of your community, and ran here? After we couldn't even look at your home without being shot at?" responded Barnabas. "That's right," said the woman. "So what exactly is the plan here?" asked Ruby. "We arrest you, put you on trial, and execute you if necessary," answered the woman bluntly. "Please don't take this the wrong way, but if you were in the business of killing members of your community, we wouldn't have to hide it," pointed out Barnabas. "Really?" responded the leader after receiving the programmer's words as a challenge. "Really?" replied Barnabas, then causing all the women's guns to melt. One of the women tried to attack from behind with a knife, but is casually knocked out by a single punch from Eyes, who doesn't even look at her. "The way I see it, you have 3 options. You can keep provoking my wife and get seriously injured. You can let us be, or you can allow me to catch the murderer who is clearly living among you," said Barnabas. Barnabas, Eyes, and Ruby were driven back to the castle, where Barnabas was allowed to examine the victim's body with his programming skills. "She was stabbed, but her guard was down right up to the attack. And even after she was stabbed, there was no struggle," commented Barnabas. "How many children do you have living here?" he then asked. "About 15, responded the leader. "I need to speak with them," said Barnabas. All the children were seated in the community's courtyard for Barnabas to observe. He then approached a little girl who was about 7 years of age. "What's your name?" asked Barnabas. "Maya," responded the little girl. "Why did you kill her, Maya?" asked Barnabas, to the shock of everyone around. "My dad was hurt when he brought me here. They let me in, but they let him die outside," said the girl, then bursting into tears. "Is that true?" asked Ruby. "We don't allow men in here because they are dangerous," defended the leader. "And women aren't?" replied Ruby. "Have you ever met a female bandit?" asked the leader in an effort to reinforce her point. Eyes approached the little girl, gently picked her up, and proceeded to leave the community, while the little girl cried in her arms. Barnabas and Ruby, without saying a word, followed her. "Are you okay?" asked Ruby as Barnabas took a knee. "I'm fine. I just need to get some rest," said Barnabas, aware of the fact that he had been pushing himself physically without getting the rest he needed. Barnabas' Eyes, Ruby and Maya found an appropriate spot nearby to set up camp. Barnabas was so exhausted that they had to do so the old-fashioned way, without the use of his programming skills. Instead, at the amazement of Maya, they relied on the use of Eyes' physical gifts as well as her flawless survival skills. "You guys go ahead. The village should be safe and it's only about a mile away. All I need is a few hours of sleep, which means by the time you get Maya settled there and return, I'll be back to full strength," said Barnabas, getting comfortable in the hut his wife built, while using his jacket as a blanket. Eyes kissed her husband on the forehead and began walking toward the village, with Maya gladly following behind, which prompted Ruby to reluctantly leave her traveling companion to get some rest. "Will you teach me to be strong like you?" asked Maya as she held on to the hand of her newly found hero, while they walked together. Eyes responded by giving Maya her standard look before playfully ruffling up the little girl's hair. "And here's me thinking Barnabas doesn't rub off on you," commented Ruby with a smile. The three arrived at a village, which was a small but lively community that Barnabas had helped establish in the past. "Which way is the children's home?" asked Ruby. Eyes in turn scanned the area to pinpoint their destination, when she noticed Zoo standing smack in the middle of the village. Due to her time spent with Barnabas, she was instantly able to sense the old man's potential as a programmer, fused with a murderous intent. Eyes gently guided Maya to Ruby, who could see something was wrong, and said, "Run." At this point, Zoo began to unleash a huge variety of elemental attacks on the entire village, with a total disregard for life. Eyes in turn began to walk towards Zoo while drawing her sword. Her walk became a light jog, before evolving into a full-blown run-up. Eyes leaped at Zoo, who without even looking at her, unleashed a flurry of elemental attacks, including earth, fire, and water. Eyes dodged the first wave of attacks that were fire-based and then cut through and blocked the remaining attacks on the vehicle of her inhuman level of speed, strength, and agility. Zoo, now intrigued by his opponent, who was still advancing towards him, created a dozen humanoid monsters made out of earth and molten lava. Eyes made quick work of his monstrous army. For what they had in size and strength, they lacked in speed and fluid movement. Before long, Eyes stood before Zoo in her sword-based fighting stance. Zoo, with a smirk, gives a hand gesture that dares Eyes to attack. The female warrior was more than happy to accept Zoo's invitation as she unleashed the full force of her combat skills that was technical, nimble, fast, and powerful on a level that Zoo had never felt from any normal human being. Zoo, although surprised, was far from overwhelmed as he responded with a fighting style that was as defensive as Barnabas's and as brutal as Eyes. In no time, he disarmed his opponent, who was unable to inflict any damage due to the armor of wind all around his body. He then attacked several of Eyes' pressure points that instantly paralyzed her lower body. Zoo grabbed Eyes by the neck and raised her off the ground with one hand. "You were overindulged during your training," said Zoo, knowing full well her skills had benefited from being around a fellow programmer. An hour later, Barnabas awoke to Ruby screaming his name. "What's going on?" asked Barnabas as he watched Ruby run with Maya to the camp frantically. "It's Eyes," answered Ruby, while trying to catch her breath. Most human beings only use about 10% of their brains. I was born into a fairly large society of programmers, born with the ability to use around 40% of our brains. This meant we possessed a unique perspective of the world that allowed us to control various elements of nature. Meaning we could cook without stoves, cover great distances without vehicles, and access information without computers. Not that we didn't still use all that stuff. The community I grew up in was a Christian one, made up of people from all over the world, who were found and gathered by our village's founder. who I never saw because he was constantly out looking for people like us. To sense and get to our home was impossible unless you possessed the ability we were born with. Most programmers' abilities didn't manifest until around the age of 11, and usually meant being able to manipulate one of 4 base elements of earth, air, water, and fire. Once in a while, you got people who could manipulate more than one element, and I was one of those people. By the age of 5, I was manipulating all 4 base elements. What can I say? I was a bit of a prodigy. My natural prowess did have its drawbacks in the form of stamina issues, as manipulating all 4 elements put a lot of strain on my body. Because of this, I was made to become a student of all programming disciplines, which included combat, medicine, architecture, and agriculture. I was 10 years old when they brought her into the village. "What's going on?" I asked, as I saw Derek, one of our youngest and leading scientists, bringing a rough, wild, and dirty-looking girl around my age into the village inside a cage. "Doc found a young beasting and wants to see if he can make it function socially like the rest of us," explained my father, who was a simple man with a passion for agriculture. "Beastling? I thought the modern world had made them extinct," I said to myself. "That was the general consensus, but Doc has gone and found us one," replied my father as he headed off to work, leaving me in a state of fascination. Beastlings were people that survived in the wild from infancy, and as a result acted and lived like wild animals. They were what the Tarzan folktale was based off on. Only in real life, they were far more dangerous. Tarzan in real life was more likely to rip Jane into pieces than start a relationship with her. Beastlings were stronger, faster, smarter, and more agile than any animal. It was said in the jungle, they were on top of the food chain. The beastling was put in a secure safari-type environment created in Derek's institute, which did its best not to look like a cage. "Hello, young Barnabas. What can I do for you?" greeted Derek as I walked into his laboratory. "Hey, Doc, is it okay if I take a look at the beastling?" I asked politely. "Sure," said Derek, taking me to a large, impenetrable window through which I could look into the world Derek had created for her. "Where is she?" I asked, unable to see her anywhere. Before another word could be spoken, the beastling jumped out of nowhere and stared right back at me through the window. She seemed to look at me with the same curiosity as I had for her. "Can she hear us?" I asked. "Yep. I'm hoping a big part of her learning process will come from observing me," answered Derek. "She doesn't seem dangerous," I said. "Looks can be deceiving," said Derek, as he left me in order to carry on with his work. "Hello, my name is Barnabas," I said to the beastling quietly, who in turn just stared at me. "I'm going to call you Eyes because of your clear desire to stare at people. Is that okay?" I said, with Eyes in turn staring at me with an emotionless look. For the next 3 months, my fascination with Eyes grew daily, as after studies I would go over to the institute and talk to her for hours. I would tell her about the fact that I loved medicine and hated combat training, as I thought it was a waste of time, seeing as I had no desire or plan to fight anyone. I also shared the fact that my answer to my stamina problem was simple: focus on one element like everyone else, and of course for me that element was water, as it was the element used by medically focused programmers. Eyes would just stare at me while I spoke, and although she didn't say anything, I was so sure she could understand what I was saying. One afternoon, I took a break from rambling on and took time to stare back at Eyes. I then put my hand on the glass, and she responded by doing the same. Inspired by the fact that the only thing separating our palms from touching each other was the window of her cage, I looked around and noticed Derek had stepped out of the laboratory. I couldn't access the cage through its door. As to do so, I needed Derek's access codes, which I knew he wouldn't give me. So I figured out how to get into Eyes' cage through its ventilation system. When I jumped in, we spent the first 30 seconds just staring at each other, before Eyes finally ran up and began to mercilessly attack me. The beating she gave me was brutal. I couldn't physically get her off me, and the first blow I received from her left me too injured to utilize any programming techniques. It was worse than being mauled by a bear. If she wasn't biting me, she was stamping on top of me, or she was throwing me around the cage like a rag doll. If Derek hadn't returned to the laboratory when he did and sedated her, I don't think I would have survived the attack. Eyes broke most of the bones in my body, which left me bedridden for about 6 months, during which I mastered the art of manipulating the elements without the use of elaborate hand gestures. In the 7th month, my newfound skills allowed me to move around in a wheelchair, which I used to go back to the institute, where I would sit for hours, day after day, filled with rage, staring at Eyes, who stared back with no emotion or remorse. I felt betrayed because I really believed we had connected. Your dad gave me an earful, and he was right to do so. I shouldn't have left you here unsupervised, said Derek. I didn't respond. All I did was stare at Eyes, who stared back. I guess we should have taken on board the fact that right now, she's as dangerous as any other animal brought in from the wild, added Derek. 3 days later, Novak, my combat instructor, came to keep me company. Doc told me you and your girlfriend had a bit of a tiff, said Novak as he took a sip beside me. She's not my girlfriend, I answered with a tone that advertised the fact that I was still sulking. When I was a little bit older than you, I met this girl who was gorgeous. All the guys wanted to go out with her, but like a lot of teenage girls who got a lot of attention from boys, she was an expert of shooting guys down. Boy, I couldn't tell you all the ways she said no to me, but eventually she gave in and went on to become my wife. Do you know why that is? Why? I asked, unable to resist my inquiring mind, despite my mood. Because I took all her crap and then some, but still kept coming back for more, replied Novak. Nice story, I said sarcastically, unable to see its relevance. This poor girl's reasoning is trapped in a world ruled by only primal instincts and violence. If you truly want to connect with her, you can't expect her to speak your language without trying to speak hers, explained Novak. His words pierced my offended heart and inspired a strategy that involved me using everything I had to get my body stronger, faster, more flexible, and more agile. I had begun to take my combat training a lot more seriously, putting a lot of emphasis on defense, counter-attacking, manipulating opponents' weights, pressure points, and being evasive. I also mastered the art of using programming skills to enhance my physical attributes and create constructs with all 4 elements, which I found to be a useful combat skill. I did all this without neglecting spending at least an hour a day having a staring match with Eyes. After 2 years, I once again snuck into the cage and stood before Eyes. Like before, Eyes spent 30 seconds staring at me before attacking relentlessly. This time I was prepared. Eyes like me had grown bigger and stronger, but this time I was able to effectively engage her in hand-to-hand combat, as Eyes was more of a force of nature than a person with fighting skills. We fought all night, and it took every trick I had to successfully keep up with her and leave her cage. For the next year, I would sneak into the institute and do battle with Eyes every night, to the point the fights began to feel less like me risking my life and more like me hanging out with her. One night, while Eyes and I were fighting, she just stopped and stood in front of me. Sorry, said Eyes. Her word hit me harder than any strike I had received from her in the past. You can talk? I responded in shock. That night we both snuck out of the cage and into my home, where she bathed like a person and not an animal. The next day, Derek was in panic because he thought a dangerous beastling was running around the village. Hey Doc, I said as I and Eyes walked into his laboratory. I don't believe it. How? When? Responded Derek, who was beyond amazed. I told him everything I had been doing for the past 2 years, and he in turn facilitated Eyes being integrated into our community. Even though Eyes and I would speak for hours, she refused to talk to anyone else. I guess in her mind they would always be the enemy because they were happy just to leave her in a cage. In public, we developed a language that involved the subtle movement of our eyes, which was as comprehensive as the use of speech. At this point, our night fights were more pure training sessions, instead of being the only way we could communicate. For the next 7 years, we did everything together, whether it was studying, working in a laboratory, doing chores, or just resting. One day, Ice took me to where she lived before Derek captured her. She shared with me that she has no memory of a family. All she remembered was a life of surviving alone, and then a life of surviving with me. After relaying this, we shared a soft and intimate kiss, which sealed a bond we had that transcended anything I could express in English. That night we returned to the village. only to find it totally destroyed. Everything I knew and everyone I loved was gone. Barnabas, with no regard for his health, used his programming abilities to fly where Eyes was last seen, as fast as he could, only to find rubble and dozens of dead bodies. A scene almost identical to the day he found his homeland in ruins. The young programmer analyzed the area and picked up an energy signature, the way a bloodhound would a scent. He then flew Ruby and Maya to the care of Harold before using the energy signature he picked up as a source of navigation. Because his emotions had overridden his sense of practicality, Barnabas found himself falling out of the sky as a result of untreated exhaustion. "What was that?" asked Randall, a 60-year-old scavenger that worked the wastelands. "I think that was a person," said Murdoch, his fellow scavenger and a friend of many years. Both men approached the now unconscious Barnabas. "Is he alive?" asked Murdoch, while his friend listened for a heartbeat. The two men then proceeded to search the young programmer in an effort to find anything they would deem valuable or useful. "Wow, this is fancy," said Murdoch as he put on Barnabas's glasses, only to find they served as mini computers as well as spectacles. Barnabas then began to groan as he gained consciousness. "Ow," blurted out Barnabas, holding the back of his head in pain. "Well, howdy, sunshine," said Randall as he and Murdoch stood over the young man. Barnabas, who was just able to take back his glasses and get to his feet, tried to manipulate the air around him, which in turn caused him to faint. A few hours later, Barnabas awoke with a foggy haze, only to find himself near a fire where Randall and Murdoch sat drinking. "Where am I?" asked Barnabas as he sat up. "Welcome to our humble abode," said Murdoch, who was clearly drunk. Barnabas looked around what seemed to be their campsite, which was made up of a large tacky tent, a well, and a fire to sit around. "What happened?" asked Barnabas as he once again took his glasses off of Murdoch. "You, my friend, fainted, and so we dragged your behind for 3 miles to give you this here hospitality," answered Randall. "Thanks," said Barnabas, now realizing he had finally got the rest he needed. "Thanks? I feel kind of bad now," whispered Randall to Murdoch. "Sorry?" responded Barnabas, who was immediately shot with a tranquilizer dart by Randall's hand. 15 minutes later, Warren, a 7-foot sentient being that was half lava and half man, approached the camp. "Why have you summoned me?" asked Warren in his deep demonic voice. "You said we should let you know if you see anything out of the ordinary. Well, this guy here fell out of the sky," answered Randall as he and Murdoch nervously got to their feet. Warren looked at Barnabas, who seemed unconscious. The humanoid then proceeded to turn his right hand into a flaming blade and approach the young programmer, only to be suddenly impaled through the stomach by a large, sharp pike made entirely out of ice. "Looks like today is your unlucky day," said Barnabas as he got to his feet and approached Warren, who was in so much pain he couldn't even speak. "For the record, your two geniuses there had no idea I'm immune to all forms of medications and poisons until my enhancements are shut down," said Barnabas as he watched Randall and Murdoch run off as fast as they could. "Here's the thing. I know you are a high-level construct of the programmer who took my wife, and I would have allowed you to kidnap me with the hope you'd take me to your creator. But since you clearly want to end my life, I'm going to have to end yours and then use all your insights to track down your master. I'm not really one for ending people's life, but seeing as you're a construct, which is basically nature's artificial intelligence, I guess it really doesn't count," shared Barnabas into the ear of Warren, who by now was so overridden with pain he wasn't able to acknowledge or express any fear. Thanks to the remains of Warren, Barnabas was able to navigate himself towards Zoo's current location. Then after around 12 hours of traveling, the trail suddenly went cold. This caused the young programmer to slow down his search by abandoning the method of flying and resulting to the much slower option of walking. 30 minutes later, he came across 3 young Caucasian women sitting around a campfire. "Hiya, do you mind if I join you?" asked Barnabas after approaching the women. "Sure," responded one of the women with short red hair. "My name is Barnabas," introduced the young programmer as he took a seat. "My name is Edna. And the woman on my right with long blonde hair is Agnes, and the black-haired lady on my left is Patricia, said Edna as her friends waved at Barnabas. So what brings you to these neck of the woods? Asked Agnes. I'm looking for my wife. She was taken about 2 days ago, explained Barnabas. I'm sorry to hear that. Damn those bandits. They're everywhere, responded Agnes. This world has got a lot more dangerous since the disappearances, which is ironic. One would think the world would be a lot safer with fewer people around, commented Patricia. I have this gift to endow others with powers, which I never used on her, because I thought she would misuse them. Instead, I gave her a sword to protect herself, shared Barnabas. A sword? A bit primitive, don't you think? I'm thinking at least a gun, responded Patricia. Unless you can make bullets out of thin air? In this climate, a sword is the way to go, argued Agnes. The point is, she had more than proven on several occasions that she would give her life to protect the innocent. If I hadn't been so self-righteous, she might have had the power to protect herself and still be with me. The sad thing is, I gave power to people I barely knew, continued Barnabas. It's easy to romanticize about someone when you've lost them, but from what I can tell, you had a very good reason not to give her that power, pointed out Edna. When my hometown was destroyed, months passed with me just being immobilized by sadness. During that time, she sat with me, she held me, and she took care of me. God used her to sustain me in a way that allowed him to place in my heart what I'm meant to do with my life, shared Barnabas. Which is? Asked Patricia. To serve and help others for his glory, answered Barnabas. You sound like a religious, commented Edna. I'm a Christian, which is far from religious, pointed out Barnabas. If you're a Christian, how come you were left behind? Asked Patricia. Don't tell me you believe in that rapture crap, blurted out Edna. Allow him to humor me, responded Patricia. Honestly, because I held a lot of hatred towards whoever destroyed my hometown, which was a Christian community. But to be truthful, if they weren't all destroyed, many, if not all my people would have been left behind, because they refused to use their incredible gifts to serve the world. Instead, they dedicated their lives to self-indulgence and self-interest, answered Barnabas. The whole concept of God is a joke to me, stated Edna. Show some respect, responded Agnes. I'm just saying, war, famine, disease, and every horrible thing you can think of. What's that all about? Do you know there are bugs whose entire existence centers around digging through people's eyeballs? Continued Edna. You wouldn't exactly get through the pearly gates with words like that, laughed Patricia. I wouldn't want to. I want no part of a God who subjects people to all manner of pain for no real reason, who after messing about with our lives expects us to worship him and be grateful. I want no part of a God who is clearly a sadistic narcissist, responded Edna. About 30 seconds of uncomfortable silence followed. I don't know what has happened to make you so angry with God, but I can tell you that he loves you very much, so much so he was willing to come down as a man and be tortured and killed for you. What you have to understand is at the end of it all, we are going to enter into eternity. For most of us, that will be through death. But death as we human beings know it is nothing before God, which is why he places all his emphasis on the state of our soul. You can live the most comfortable life possible, but if you die without giving your heart to Jesus, you will end up in eternal damnation. Likewise, you can live the most uncomfortable life possible, but if you die giving your heart to Jesus, you will end up in an eternity filled with love and joy beyond anything you can comprehend, responded Barnabas gently, which in turn left the three women in deep thought. I've really enjoyed being able to talk with you all, but I think it's time we address the elephant in the room, announced Barnabas, which caused all three women to look up at him. I am a programmer, which is why you have been unable to read my thoughts. It's also the reason why I know you three are witches who prey on unsuspecting travelers. So here's what's going to happen. I will spare your lives, but I will strip you of all your abilities, after which you can travel about 3 miles east, where you will find a village that should allow you to integrate with the community. explained Barnabas. Seeing it pointless to keep up the charade, all three women revealed their true and demonic-looking forms before proceeding to attack the young programmer, who, without breaking a sweat, subdues them all and removes their powers with the technique he discovered while battling Ruby, which in turn rendered them unconscious. After traveling for another day, the only thing that stood between Barnabas and the man who kidnapped Eyes was a dark valley, which the young programmer chose to walk through as it led to a tunnel a few meters ahead. "Hey there, little guy," said Barnabas as he knelt to greet a boy who was dressed in rags and looked like he was around 6 years old. The boy responded to Barnabas with a blank look. "Are your parents nearby?" asked Barnabas, to which he once again got no reply. Curious as to how such a young child could survive in such a harsh area, potentially on his own, Barnabas used his skills to scan the child's physical makeup and found his DNA to be slightly different from that of the average person. The boy, while Barnabas was scanning him, took the young programmer by the hand and led him to a part of the valley where hundreds of young children stood. "Are there any adults around?" asked Barnabas, who was now beginning to get a bad feeling as the children surrounded him in the area that was littered with human bones. The young programmer then looked at the boy who was holding his hand, only to find him transform into a demonic zombie-like creature, causing Barnabas to jump back startled, while all the children around him began to have the exact same kind of transformation. Barnabas immediately manipulated the air around him in such a way he was able to leap over the children and run towards the tunnel. Sometimes, seeing the extent of how this world has fallen overwhelms me to the point I want to break, Barnabas thought to himself as the creatures chased him with rabid determination. However, I know where my strength ends, God's strength begins, said Barnabas as he made a decision to stop running and face the horde that was approaching him. Barnabas, with his amazing combat skills, began to strike pressure points of the wild creatures in an effort to get them reverted back to their human forms, but had no success. He then tried to extract the essence of their demonic nature with a water-based medical technique, which had proved to be effective in the past, with no avail. The contaminated water in the area had fused with the children's unique DNA on such a molecular level that nothing known to the young programmer would cure them. The only option was to end their lives, for if he didn't, others would fall victim to these creatures that had sadly started out as children. Barnabas engulfed his hands in flames and utilized a perfect marriage of his combat skills with his control over the fire element to turn every creature that attacked him into ash. After the battle was over, it began to rain, and Barnabas dropped to his knees, mourning the death of all his attackers. Barnabas enters an empty hall the size of a grand auditorium, at the end of which stood Zoo beside a chained-up Eyes, whose sword laid on the ground in front of her. 3 days to track us down? Clearly you have much to learn, said Zoo as Barnabas approached him. What is this all about? Asked Barnabas, determined not to give in to his rage. You, my boy, are living proof that your community needed to be destroyed. I mean, you're one programmer, and look at all the grief you've caused me. Only God knows what I would have been put through if there were hundreds of you out there, said Zoo as he carelessly examines Eyes, who seemed to be slipping in and out of consciousness. I don't understand, responded Barnabas, now confused as well as enraged. I was born the son of the most powerful kung fu practitioner ever to live. The thing is, as a martial artist, he was good but far from great. The true source of his power was his programming abilities, which he sold as abilities anyone could achieve if they dedicated their lives to following him as a disciple. This, of course, made him very wealthy and influential. As his child, eager to please him, I fed his con by pretending to be a living example of this promise. At the time, I was convinced only people with my family's blood could possess the elemental abilities of a programmer. That was until 10 years after my father's death. I was challenged to a duel by a wandering foreigner who turned out to be a fire programmer. Even though I ended his life easily, he had left me with the fact that there were other people out there like me. For the next 60 years, I traveled the world searching for people like me, which led to the creation and establishment of your home. Or should I say, former home, explained Zoo. I don't understand. Why would you destroy a community you spent so long creating? Asked Barnabas, who was beyond appalled. My boy, despite our power, we are not on top of the food chain. There are individuals with powers you couldn't begin to comprehend. And these people currently run this world. I was promised complete control of the wastelands. All I had to do was make it a living nightmare for people who refused the implant and tried to hide here. This meant eliminating every programmer who chose to live outside the system. For a bunch of Christian programmers could end up making the wastelands pretty habitable, like you've tried to do, which, by the way, has been all in vain, for I can undo all you've done in less than 24 hours, responded Zoo. Maybe, if all I did was provide security in the natural. How do you think things will end for you? I know you're not immortal, so even if it was possible to get past me, eventually you will die and stand before God. Come to think of it, I'm not even sure if you can class a chip programmer as a human, responded Barnabas, then proceeding to engulf his now clenched fists in flames. I think you overestimate your abilities. A whole village of programmers couldn't stop me from slaughtering them. What makes you think you even have a fraction of a chance? Said Zoo, then unleashing 7 wooden tentacles with the objective to impel Barnabas, who in turn used his incredible agility to slide, jump, roll, and flip out of the way. After which the young programmer found himself in the middle of 4 large humanoid constructs made out of dirt. He destroyed one with a flying knee to the face, and then used its remains to destroy the remaining 3 with a series of slickly created weapons, only to find himself in front of a large wave of water, which he used his programming skills to split into 2 giant fists, which he thrust at Zoo, who intercepted them with a wall of fire, which in turn filled the room with steam and distracted Zoo long enough for Barnabas to engage him in hand-to-hand combat, where both seemed evenly matched. Zoo managed to sidekick Barnabas 10 feet away from him, who in turn flipped to his feet, only to find the evil programmer had created a large steel wall, from which he began to shoot thousands of steel spikes at him. Barnabas in turn quickly manipulated and transformed all the spikes that headed towards him into a reinforced steel armor while he ran towards his foe. The young programmer then leapt over the wall and landed in front of Zoo with a punch, which the evil programmer stopped with his palm, at which point the steel fist was nothing more than an extension of an empty shell, as Barnabas emerged from the suit with a rugby tackle, the force of which Zoo used to throw Barnabas over him. As the programmer got to his feet, he found himself once again engaging Zoo in hand-to-hand combat. This time, the evil programmer showed that the first time he was just toying with Barnabas. Before long, Zoo broke his opponent's right hand and left leg, which caused Barnabas to hit the ground, yelling in pain. Because I'm impressed, I will kill you with my bare hands, said Zoo as he walked towards the now defenseless programmer, before feeling the sharp pain of a sword being driven through him, a result of her now free eyes due to all the destruction caused by both programmers fighting, literally stabbing him through the back with her sword. You were overindulged during your training, whispered Eyes into the ears of Zoo, then proceeding to yank her sword out of him, which caused the evil programmer to hit the ground, where his life slowly began to expire. Ibra's passion was always dance. It didn't matter if it was ballet, tap, jazz, swing, hip-hop, salsa, or ballroom. Dance made her feel like her true self. She was on the cusp of reaping the maximum rewards of a 10-year career when the world changed. A spirit not taken too well with the mandatory implant initiatives saw her wandering the wastelands, where she was kidnapped and violated by bandits, before being abandoned pregnant in its desert regions. Ibra was lucky to find a community that welcomed and took care of her, in a world that seemed determined to break her. Her twins were 3 years old when Barnabas defended her hometown from monsters and delivered it from a ring of serial killers. God used him to provide a community with a means to defend themselves physically and spiritually. With the water programming skills endowed to her, Ibra was determined to be a blessing to her home, which had been touched by God. This drove her to hone her programming skills with daily practice. The day a government army unit descended on her community, she was but a few stone throws away from being a master. That day, Ibra returned from a solo training session to find modern-looking and equipped soldiers dragging every man, woman and child of her community to the town center and putting them on their knees. You see, it had been a year since Zoo's implant went offline, and since then, an order had been put out to find and erase any unauthorized communities set up in the wasteland areas. As soon as she spotted the actions of the government units, Ibra wasted no time unleashing an onslaught of attacks, utilizing both water and ice, which none of the soldiers were able to stop or withstand, with the exception of 3 men who effortlessly emerged from the chaos caused by Ibra's attacks. Agent Adewale, a tall, black, athletically built man who was in his early 30s. Agent Gichi, a young Japanese average height male with a similar build. And Agent Lambert, a young, short Caucasian male with a slightly more muscular build than that of his colleagues. All 3 men had short army-style haircuts and wore government agent uniforms, which were identical to the outfit Zoo always wore. "Stand down, agents, I've got this," said Agent Adewale as he took a step forward while his fellow agents stood back. "Agent Adewale, please give password to activate full battle mode," prompted the artificial analyst embedded in the agent's implant. Agent Adewale smirked before saying, "You never holla." Agent Adewale's word activated a suit that turned him into a 10-foot ape-like robot. Ibra stood her ground in astonishment as the people of her town ran for their lives. Operating without an implant is a federal offense and is deemed as an act of terror. The penalty for this crime is on-the-spot execution, announced Adewale in a voice that matched the fact that he was now in a highly advanced suit. "Even if you don't live in a metropolitan area?" asked Ibra as she entered the fighting stance. "Especially if you don't live in a metropolitan area," answered the agent, then proceeding to advance towards a female programmer, who in turn unleashed a landscaping-altering attack, creating an explosion of water, smoke, and ice. The dust settled only to reveal Agent Adewale and his colleagues standing totally unscathed or even bothered because of a force field developed by the study of Zoo's abilities. Ibra continued to fight with every fiber of her being, but her efforts were in vain as she was unable to preserve her life, the life of her townspeople, or the life of her children. David was a professional martial arts champion when the world changed. Despite his chosen profession, David was brought up in a world of privilege. This meant he had wealth on top of wealth, which allowed him to stay away from the option of taking the implant for longer than most. Until the day government agents kicked his door down and arrested him alongside his wife, brother, and kids. "Is this necessary?" asked David while being questioned by a government officer. "We have intel that indicates people who refuse the mandatory implants are part of sleeper cell terrorist units," responded the officer. "I'm a professional athlete, husband and father of 2 very demanding kids, 3 if you count my brother. Trust me, I have no time to be part of any cell or unit. Tell you what, just put me with my family and we'll take the implants right now," said David, whose words caused the officers to whisper amongst themselves before arranging for him to be taken back to his cell. "Listen, brother, if you take the implant, not only will the government be able to track your every movement, kill you with a flick of a switch or mind control you, but you will damn your soul for all eternity. For the implant is the mark of the beast talked about in the book of Revelation. Think about it. Why else are they killing people who refuse it?" explained Clive, his cellmates. David quickly dismissed Clive's words as the ramblings of a deranged old man, as he was distracted by thoughts about his family's well-being. Then he witnessed his first execution, which prompted him to immediately approach the nearest guard. "Where is my family? Where is my family?" erratically asked David as flashbacks of his wife and brother having anti-government debates with him flooded his mind. A few guards tried to restrain him but failed miserably. Then the camp came under attack, and while Harold fled with Susan as well as 20 other prisoners, David fled alone into the forest. For 2 days, David walked aimlessly through the wastelands before finally fainting. "Where am I?" asked David as he gained consciousness in a tent with a scruffy middle-aged woman sitting beside him. "Don't try to move. Here, have some water," said the woman, handing him a bowl. "You need to rest and eat to regain your strength," informed the woman. Despite his desire to get up, all David could do was go back to sleep. 12 hours later, David was back on his feet thanks to some well-needed rest, food, and water. "Thank you," said David to Fran, the woman who had nursed him back to health. You don't have to thank me, as we all have been displaced in this new world order. You are welcome to travel with us, offered Fran, referring to the traveling community made up of about 15 people, which included mainly women, children, and the elderly. I need to figure out how to get to my family, responded David. Before his conversation with Fran could go any further, the group found themselves surrounded by a small army of wild bandits. Hey, aren't you David Rockhold? Asked one of the bandits while he was arranging a group of travelers into a line. Boss, look, it's David Rockhold, announced the organizing bandits. As I live and breathe, it's David Rockhold, the greatest fighter of this generation. I wouldn't expect to see a celebrity like you in a place like this. I mean, a lot of rich and famous people talk tough about the mandatory implants, but when it came down to the wire, they just took it to be comfortable in the world of luxury, said the lead bandit as he approached David. Are you really as good as you are on TV? Asked the organizing bandits. Of course he is. He's a fighter, not an actor, replied the lead bandit. Some people say a lot of those fights are rigged, said the organizing bandits. People say that when they're mad after they lose money, argued the lead bandit. How about we test him right now? Mr. Rockhold, you'd be willing to fight, won't you? Asked the organizing bandit. David responded by quietly looking at the ground in an effort to avoid eye contact. I think he needs some motivation, said the lead bandit. He then signaled 3 of his men to attack David, who in turn just covered up while they proceeded to beat on him. Leave him alone, screamed Fran, which prompted one of the bandits to floor her with a backhand slap. This angered David, who in a few moments got to his feet and knocked out all 3 of his attackers before proceeding to check on Fran's welfare. I told you he was a real deal. He just needed the right motivation, said the lead bandit to his subordinates. Mr. Rockhold, my men and I are very good at surviving in these parts, and we are willing to offer you and your friends shelter, food, and protection if you fight for me, said the lead bandit, now addressing David. All we want is to be left alone, responded David. I see. Maybe I should rephrase my offer, said the lead bandit, then proceeding to shoot Fran in the head, killing her instantly. Fight for me, or we will kill you and your friends, said the lead bandit, unmoved by the emotional devastation caused by his action. David fought every day for a year until the day Barnabas and Eyes came to the camp, freed them and endowed him with programming skills. Still determined to be reunited with his family, David trained daily to hone his new abilities and quickly found that he was able to manipulate the elements of earth, fire, wind, as well as water. Daniel, a young man mesmerized by David, begged to be the new programmer's student, a request which was granted as David saw no harm in it. To both of their amazements, David's training regime revealed the fact that David was a fire programmer. A year and a half after receiving his programming abilities, David began working on a plan to return back to the metropolitan area where his family was held. But his planning was short-lived as Agent Adewale and his unit descended on his community that was now 40 people strong. David was more than a competent warrior with high-level programming skills, but after a few exchanges with the 3 agents, he knew to continue to do battle with them would mean certain death. David and a reluctant Daniel retreated into the forest and began to head towards one of the coordinates given to him by Barnabas, in case he needed support of any kind. 3 days later, in a Barnabas-established camp, situated in the mountain regions of the wastelands, Harold and Peebles, the head of the ninja army that chose to ally with him, talked as they walked through the camp under their care. Evacuation at this point seems to be our only viable option, stated Peebles. If government agents are actively seeking and destroying wasteland communities, where would we go that would be safe? Asked Harold. I say we go to wherever Barnabas is. If there's anyone who can help with this, it would be him, answered Peebles. One of Peebles' men then jumped to his side and whispered into his ear. 2 of Barnabas' programmers are approaching the area, informed Peebles, prompting him and Harold to head to the entrance of the community, where they found a very exhausted David and Daniel running into the community. They're right behind us, informed David as he and Daniel caught their breaths. Who is behind you? Asked Harold, immediately after which Agent Adewale in full battle mode landed right in the middle of the community and instantly disintegrated in one shot 20 ninja soldiers that tried to attack him all at once. We can do that, you just rest, said Ruby, while clearing up after a family picnic, to a now 6 months pregnant Eyes, who in turn went to sit beside her husband, who was using his programming skills to clean up the small camp he had created for him, Eyes, Ruby, and Maya. Don't worry, my love. As soon as there is any heavy lifting needed, I'd let you get in on it. But we will have to make sure Ruby isn't looking, joked Barnabas as he allowed Eyes to rest her head on his shoulder. Sorry to bring them here. We haven't got long, blurted out Harold as he approached Barnabas' area with Daniel and David helping an injured people to walk right behind him. What's going on? Asked Barnabas. Agents, responded Harold. Get him, Maya, and Ruby to the safe house, instructed Barnabas, to which Eyes immediately responded. Nothing we throw at them seems to have any effect, informed David, as Barnabas noticed the 3 pursuing agents approach the area in full battle mode. Agent Adewale in his 10-foot ape-like bionic suits, Agent Gichi in a ninja-like bionic suit, and Agent Lambert in a tiger-like bionic suit. Before we try to hurt them, let's first move them, said Barnabas, hitting his palm on the ground, causing the large concrete spikes to shoot out beneath all 3 agents, causing them to clumsily get out of the way by a hair, while being bombarded with rock and ice boulders, being shot at them by David and Harold. After quickly regaining their balance, the agents, with the help of their force fields, chose to run through the 2 programmers' attacks in an effort to put their hands on them. David and Harold reacted by jumping back, while Barnabas leaped forward with a force field of his own made up of air and electricity. This allowed him to make contact with all 3 agents, utilizing his hand-to-hand combat skills, which saw him swing round a large and powerful attacking agent Adewale like a tree, while effectively attacking and counter-attacking agent Gichi and Lambert. During this exchange, Barnabas was able to creatively use his abilities to crack all 3 agents' implants before leaping to the side of his comrades. Attack now, instructed Barnabas, prompting Daniel, David, and Harold to unleash an onslaught of ice, earth, and fire-based projectiles, which, to the agents' dismay, began to hit them. What happened to our force fields? Asked Agent Gichi as he and his colleagues were forced to block. The 4 programmers then advanced forward and began to bombard the agents with a combination of both physical and elemental attacks, which put an immense strain on all 3 agents' battlesuits, so much so it caused the cracked implants to shatter, causing all of them to fall over like sack of potatoes, while their battlesuits disintegrated. What happened? Asked David as he and his fellow programmers looked down at the bodies of their foes. Their damaged implants couldn't take the strain of the battle. Unfortunately for them, when their implants go offline, they go offline, explained Barnabas. Agents are destroying any wasteland colony they find. We have to do something, informed Harold. All we can do is empower people with the gospel of Jesus Christ, answered Barnabas, then beginning to make his way towards the safe house he had set up for emergencies. That's all you have to say? Said Harold. What more do you want me to say? Replied Barnabas. It's your fault the agents are on a rampage in the first place, stated Harold angrily. How did you figure that out? Answered Barnabas. Let's see now. Zoo kidnaps your wife, you rescue your wife, Zoo ends up dead, and then the government he works for begins to go on a rampage. The math isn't hard to do, argued Harold. So you're telling me things would be better if Zoo was alive? Answered Barnabas. I'm saying it is selfish and hypocritical to throw all caution out of the window when someone you care about is in danger, but jump on the fence when the danger involves people you don't know, continued Harold. Harold, you, 2 capable programmers, and an army of highly trained soldiers were helpless against 3 agents. How do you think you will fare against an army of agents? And who knows what else the government has? Asked Barnabas. You being on our side is enough to make a difference, answered Harold. You're not listening. The enemy is destined to rule this time. As far as a natural battle is concerned, we are destined to lose. This is why our focus should be on things eternal, said Barnabas. Eternal? Like playing happy families with a pregnant wife while hundreds of people are being slaughtered, stated Harold. I'm not going to apologize for taking care of my family and for not going on a suicide mission with you, replied Barnabas, then proceeding to walk away. What about my family? They are still being held by the government, cried out David as he walked right up to Barnabas. My dear brother, your family was taken 2 years ago. By now they are either chipped or dead. Either way, there's nothing we can do for them, gently replied Barnabas. David, enraged, responded by punching Barnabas across the face, which in turn dropped him to the ground. A silence then followed, before David, Daniel, and Harold walked away, leaving Barnabas on the floor. Like Water, The Next Age is now available on paperback and in ebook format via any Kindle device. Also, check out the JOMAJ Studio website, Twitter page, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube channel for the complete Like Water series and all other JOMAJ Studio features.